Hello everyone, this is Alice. Today we're going to be looking at the latest in the Lost Omens line, the Pathfinder 2e, and that is the Mwangi Expanse. So, I am personally very excited about this book. I just sort of wanted to start rather than going into the book straight away, just talking about sort of what this book means, both for Pathfinder and for wider tabletop RPGs. Because if we're honest with ourselves, and I think we need to be, the history of this particular kind of RPG, this sort of fantasy dungeon delving, and the lore that's built on is an explicitly racist lore. And a lot of people don't like to talk about that and will be upset, but it's the truth. The orcs of Tolkien's sort of works that the orcs of modern fantasy are based on were explicitly meant to be a rather vicious portrayal of Mongolian people. And a lot of the African settings in these worlds tend to be underdeveloped, written by white people, and full of pretty nasty stereotypes. And that's not something Pathfinder is immune from. The Mwangi sort of view in 1e was not kind and was often very colonial and very limited as well. And it's something that I've always been quite upset about. And so I think they've really took a massive opportunity with this, and this is really something quite revolutionary for the scene and really changes the game. Actually getting black writers on board, there are multiple black writers involved in this, to write an African fantasy setting that doesn't rely on stereotypes, that doesn't rely on colonial views, that doesn't rely on white people's views, and that instead embraces a very diverse and vibrant setting. And I think it's something that has been done fantastically, and I'm really happy to dive into this with all of you. Before we go further in the view, I do want to, just for transparency's sake, mention that I was given a free copy of the PDF by Paizo for this review. I try not to let that colour my review, but you should be aware of that. So, this book opens up with a part on reclaiming the expanse, which touches on a bit of what I talked about in the introduction here. And I believe Jabari Weathers had quite a hand in this and did a fantastic job talking about how to approach adventures in this in a way that treats the area with respect. And there's some fantastic just little sidebars in there that really go into sort of treating this place as a place where people live, not just a place where you would venture in an exotic land. Like this is a home to a lot of people, and what that means and how to portray that. And then we get into a history of the Expanse, and this is where, like, the way this is written already had me completely sold on this book. Like, we got some history that we know, and some sort of new mentions of history that we didn't know. I think one of my favourite parts here was the story of the first Anadi to approach the Magambia and beg for their forms to be kept secret, and how the Magambia in turn spread a lot of stories of Grandmother Spider and positive stories about spiders to try and make life a little easier for the Anadi. And I just thought that was such a sweet thing to include, and that was probably my first sort of early part in the book that really got to me. And that's literally just in like the introduction chapter, so it was already very emotional. And we're already also getting into some of the absolutely fantastic art. The art in this book, like in most of the Pathfinder books, quite frankly, is stunning. I think one of my favourite pieces is of an Uemoto falconer. She just looks absolutely beautiful, but there's so many fantastic ones, and I can't show them all here. But like, I would get this book just as an art book, but thankfully the lore in it is also fantastic. And then right after the histories, we start getting into the meat of the book, and we start off with the people of the Mwangi Expanse. So we start off with going into the different human ethnicities, and already this is fantastic. We are not treating the Mwangi people as a monolith. There are various ethnicities with very different interactions with each other throughout this, and we get to introduce to lots of the major ones here. The Zenge are ones we're already fairly familiar with as some of the major Mwangi people, but they're distinctly separated into two groups here with their own mythology and history, the Zenju and the Zenjay, which are absolutely brilliant, and the art, again, is wonderful. The Bonowats, personally, are probably my favourites, and I love here as well we get an indication of like a different way they worship Serenray, and we get into this more in the religion section, where we see the different ways the Mwangi Expanse portrays the gods, because, like, take a deity like Desna, she's probably some absolutely weird-looking space moth, but the cultures on Galarian will take her and depict her in a way that reflects them and that they understand. So it absolutely makes sense for them to depict Desna as a black moth instead of as a white woman, whereas in Tian Xia she might be portrayed as an Asian woman. And actually seeing that's fantastic, and I would love to see a Bonawat depiction of Serenray, more like reflecting of their culture and as a sort of guide for sailors rather than a sort of healing sort of crusader. I think that would be a really cool thing to see. So we go over the major human ethnicities, and then we get into the other ancestries, and these were some of my favourite parts. There was one thing I definitely wasn't expecting when I went into this book, and that was Nocticula. For anyone who knows me and has seen me play some games, I do play a champion of Nocticula in an Extinction Curse game, and she's a goddess I find very interesting. But she's somebody who's like kind of niche and odd, so I definitely wasn't expecting her to be part of the Alajai elf lore. So that was really exciting, and it kind of seems like, in retrospect, something that makes so much sense for them as people who sort of have it like fight demons, but are also open to listening to them. And the idea of a demon who could be redeemed for them is something sort of very exciting. And I think one of my favourite things here as well is a statue that is clearly of Nocticula when she was a demon lord, still in her unfortunate outfit, but draped with a nice like ribbon to make her look a bit nicer. It is very funny to me. It's clearly a statue they found in the demon city that they preside over, because yes, the Alagi do live and try and clear out a demon city, and then dressed it up to make it look nice for their worship of the Redeemer Queen. So that was a detail I absolutely loved. And the Alagi in general I thought were fantastic. In fact, I'm going to mention a couple of the elf ones here together, because all of the elves used to be part of one group called the Moralagi, all split over sort of ideological differences over an old prophecy of theirs. And I think what's fantastically done here is capturing the fact that these elves all come from the same root, but are now very different based on what they think the evil they're supposed to be fighting is. And I think you really get that they feel like very three distinct ancestries who share a common theme. And yeah, I think that was done really well. The Alagi were probably my favourite, partly because like I already knew quite a bit about the Ekagi, and the Kalagi are very cool, but the Alagi were just like so new and so cool. I really love their masks and the way they pass on history, but also how they pass on history in other ways, and how they differ from the Ekagi, and that they don't only use oral history, but will record in many ways, even ways that other people can access. And so, of course, they tend to value artists a lot, especially calligraphers and tattoo artists, because any ways that you can get to archive is considered very valuable. This is put in direct contrast to the Matangi orcs, who are heavily focused also on demon hunting, but aren't as big on recording, so they don't see art as valuable. And so you can immediately see why two ancestries who have similar goals and will fight together, but have different things in their cultures depending on how they approach that. And I think that's fantastic. The Matangi orcs, on that note, are brilliant. Again, like I mentioned before, orcs have an uncomfortable history in a lot of fantasy RPGs. And I think what's done so fantastically with Matangi is taking still the core concept of the orcs as these ferocious raiders, but portraying it in a very positive light, and that what they're raiding is a demon-controlled city, and that they are heavily valued for their ferocity in the Mwangi Expanse because they fight demons with it. And so it doesn't, like, people can't say, oh, these aren't real orcs, because they absolutely still feel like orcs, but they're orcs taken in a nuanced and respectful way, and in a very positive way, which really shines a light on a lot of the ways that they have been shown before. The Matangi as well, there's some brilliant stuff about the way they approach relationships, and how, even though a lot of them tend to marry politically, they're a very politically motivated orc society, but when they do marry for love, they make a very big display of it. It's expected that you'll do massive shows of your courtship, like carts full of petals of their favourite flowers, and I need a Matangi orc to woo me right now, but preferably one of the very big women, thank you, who also look fantastic. So, and what I also really loved about them was their relationship with the Yamasan people. So when the Sodden Lands was created by the Yahweh of Abandego and destroyed their country, they were fantastic farmers, brilliant agricultural experts, when a massive hurricane that lasts for 100 years comes and destroys your land, and you're all renowned farmers, you don't have much left. And the people who took them in at that time were most of them at Tangi orcs who weren't advanced agriculturally and needed help there. And they've now created a society like with the Yamasan people where they have their own area and are respected as these master farmers. And I thought that was really cool as a sort of, it's just, again, something you typically expect from orcs, sort of heavily respect human farmers, but that creates a really cool thing, creates a very cool interaction in the setting, which I really loved. Then it comes a surprise. So going in, I was expecting to love the elves. I was expecting to love the orcs. I wasn't expecting to love the dwarves. Dwarves are a group that I like, but have never captured me fully. That's until I got to here. I'm going to start with the Mbeke, just because if once I start on the Turalu, I'm going to get very emotional. The Mbeke are really cool. I really love Cloudspire. I think it's a fantastically designed city. I love the art we have of it. I love the descriptions. I love the idea of like the massive eyries of the cloud dragons living above. Everything about it is so evocative. I love that we have more evidence of the dwarves as a culture being very big into adoption of other ancestries. We see this already a bit with Torag's boons, but they're big on the idea of if you're in their culture, in their clan, you are one of them, regardless if you were born a dwarf. And we do get to see an Mbeke kobold with their own little clan dagger, which is very sweet. And I really like the idea of the sort of the wars that they had and got rid of their aristocracy, but they're still tied to the idea of calling people kings, although they now elect their kings, and so they have many, many kings who are of many genders as well. So they're really cool. But as much as I love the Mbeke, and I did, the Turalu were probably the highlights of this book for me, because I had very little expectations going in, and I fell in love. I need to make a Turalu so badly. So the Turalu are a dwarf group that used to live over near Nex and Geb, and had an argument over whether to join the war. And during this argument, a large dying cloud dragon came to them and begged them to take her to where she had grown up to be buried, to die. And all of them were so moved by her that they all put down their weapons and carried her for years across the mountains. And we get a fantastic picture of this as well, to her final resting place. And they all swore an oath to her, to Tanin, that they would from then on be diplomats and people who focused on making sure magical corruption didn't hurt anyone else. And one of the things I really love about these dwarves, not only is that origin story so sweet and defines so much of who they are as travelling nomads and diplomats, but they're very Muslim coded. And again, in fantasy stories and in much media, Muslims aren't portrayed very positively. I do believe a Muslim author was involved in some of this, Maryam Ahmad, and I think they did a fantastic job in that the Turalu dwarves often will do a pilgrimage of where their ancestors carried Tanin over the mountains. That's a very important thing that most of them try to do once in their life, as well as every day turning towards where Tanin is buried and declaring an oath. It's just so refreshing to see a very Muslim-coded group being portrayed in an incredibly positive light. And that was something, again, I really didn't expect and was very happy for. And what I loved as well, which is absolutely hysterical, is how they will worship some of the traditional dwarven gods, but they insist they're all dragons. They will just portray every god as a dragon, because they think if you're a god, then you have to be a dragon. And so they're like, oh yes, the dwarf dragon gods. And all the other dwarves are like, what on earth are you talking about? So there's a big disconnect with them and the other dwarves, and their worship of dragons, I imagine, would make them also very amenable to kobolds. But no, as soon as we get Secrets of Magic in Hell, I am making a Turalu summoner with the dragon idol on. Like, it has to be done, I'm sorry. Their hair is also fantastic. I love it. So yeah, the Turalu were just beautiful. Their whole story, like, I was ready to pledge an oath to Tanin by the end of it, and you haven't seen dwarves like this. I did forget to mention with the Mbeke, though, that I will, that the opening myth for them, the little story about them breaking through the sky, was also an absolute delight. Whoever wrote that, and I think it might have been Mikhail Raccoon, but I could be wrong, but that was fantastic. The last group that we get in this section are the Halflings. They didn't capture me as much as the others, but I did really like their fighting stick tournaments, and I also, I like a lot of their story. I feel like we need more of them, but I am quite happy. I quite like the Nana at the end. And talking about that, all of the ancestries at the end of their chapters, and we also get this in the cities, get an NPC. And I thought these were really fantastically done because it acts both as sort of introducing a very sort of relatable character from each group, but also acts as a fantastic adventure hook for each area. So, for instance, in the elves, we have the Zolha as the Alagi archivist, and they're somebody who's scared to go into the Demon City themselves, but work a lot with archiving. They could be very easily somebody an adventuring party would come along and liaison with, and they have to try and win Zolya over, and you get an idea of their story and what they would respond to with, and how they might help the adventurers. And there's some other very interesting ones. One we come to later, Shasenbei, who is a neutral evil wizard in Osaro, and he's somebody I could see involved in a campaign very interesting ways, possibly when you have to work with him for a little bit, but he will inevitably betray you. And yeah, some of these really captured me and really got really good ideas, so I thought they were so cool. So I thought that was a really good idea as well, introducing them. Like it could have gone badly, like whole pages dedicated to just these one characters, but I think it offers so much in terms of adventure hooks and humanization, and yeah, I loved that a lot. So after we have the people of the Mwangi Expanse, we then go on to deities. And talking of deities, I also completely forgot to mention, as well as Nocticula, the other really surprising goddess in here was Kazutal, who the Matangi Orcs worship. And again, this is one that in retrospect seems so obvious, because Kazutal is sort of used to be a very aggressive goddess of war. Then after Earthfall softened a lot and became much more about protection and community and family. So she almost reflects the way that the orcs are portrayed, where stop being portrayed just as a war culture, and instead focusing on how they focus on their community and family. So in a meta way, she works very well, and she just really works well for the Matangi orcs, as she's focused on sort of defensive fighting, protection of your family and community and home. They're just like, it's perfect. And I also like the implication that, they didn't get her from the Arcadians, who usually worship her. Instead, they seem to have been approached by her possibly directly or through some kind of avatar to have worshipped her. And I also love that their depiction of her shows her slightly more animalistic, and that she has claws and fangs, almost slightly more like them with their tusks. So again, we have a slightly different depiction of a goddess, which I thought was really cool. But we also, do get some new gods introduced in this. So I'm just going to mention a few of my favourites, and it has to be said, Adanye is just wonderful. So she's the new catfolk goddess who has been introduced, and she is quite literally a cat. But what's interesting about her is that she's a lawful good goddess, where she sort of acts as a sort of guiding mother to a lot of her more chaotic catfolk followers, where she's trying to keep them all out of trouble and remind them all to return to their hearth and have a nice warm nap, rather than getting into all sorts of scrapes. And I just love her as this sort of motherly cat figure. She was just wonderful, and I adore her. One of the much more different ones who I thought was a fantastic addition was Callacott. So Callacott is a god of fear, but he's a chaotic neutral god of fear who focuses on different aspects of it, and also is the god of secrets. And so he's not only the god who encourages fear in people, who encourages you to conquer your fears, but also encourages you in ways to scare people and use fear, but not just for bad things. For instance, somebody who's trying to keep people away from something dangerous might be a follower of Callacott and try and create stories about how scary the area is and keep reasons why people keep away, to use fear to try and keep people safe. And he's also a god of the reviled and the deformed, and those who society fear without reason. And he thinks that you should use that to, shock the self-righteous, and also likes to protect them. And one of the reasons I appreciate this is because he's basically a much better version of Lamashtu. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a fan of Lamashtu. I think a goddess of outcasts and those considered monsters should not be chaotic evil. And so I really appreciate a much more nuanced version of this, and somebody who you can be good and worship. And I also like how he ties in one of the new ancestries, which I'll get to in a little bit as well. One of the other gods who I really liked was Uvuko, who is a cloud dragon god who is very shy and very scared, and you mustn't be too loud or he gets very frightened. And he was very sweet. So it was really nice to see him. He's definitely one who I could see a few of the Trali worshipping as well as a very sweet cloud dragon. But yeah, I would like to see more of him. I would have liked to see more actually in general in the book of religious iconography on the characters, especially of these new gods, because I feel like that's something that I always really like seeing in the book, and we don't get much of it. I know there is a Serenray priest who is wearing a necklace, but I can't remember any other depictions of deities symbols on people, and it would be cool especially to have some of the new deities symbols on people. So that was a shame. But hardly a big one. But no, talking about the new ancestries, let's get into them. So we have 6 new ancestries added in this book. We have 3 that we knew about before, and 3 completely brand new ancestries to this, to second edition or anything. So the ones that we know from before are the Anadi, the Gnolls, and the Gripply. The Anadi are wonderful. It should be noted I am terrified of spiders, absolutely terrified of the smallest of spiders. I adore the Anadi. It's established now, their true form is massive spiders. Like, before we thought it was the humanoid hybrid spider form. No, they are just massive spiders. But they know how scared everyone is of them, so they took time to learn how to turn into humans so as not to terrify people. And they are just very polite, very shy people who just want to help their friends. They are an absolute darling ancestry. And I also love one of their feats that we get, where they can set up like ropes or webs, and they can get tremor sense. Or if somebody else is touching their web and they're touching it, you get a tremor sense of much further. So you actually get some effect exactly like a spider, where you can, detect the slightest movement on your webs to set up. So you might want to get a Natty party member to set up traps around your base. Could be very good. The Gnolls were probably my favourites. I think they've done so fantastically. And I think one of the things that works really well for them is they've really captured a society with very different ideas of morals and very different ideas of what's sacred without portraying them as evil. And it's made, like, one of the big things for them is cannibalism. And they eat their own dead because they see it as a sign of honour and of absorbing the best parts. Other societies will find that horrifying, will balk at the very idea of cannibalism, but to the Gnolls, eating somebody who is already dead and who you admired is sacred, it is not disrespectful. And so it's something that's quite shocking to some of us, but makes sense for them and is not inherently evil, and I found that really interesting. And again, how for them, as opposed to someone like the Orcs, honour they see not as a virtue but as something immoral, because they think if you're risking your life when you could instead be doing something sneaky and surviving, you are hurting your clan because they might lose you. And so for them, doing what it takes to survive and get an upper hand in a fight, even if it's not considered honourable, is considered virtuous to them. And I just love what a fantastically different society they are, that you can see why they've adopted these morals, and you can see like that this isn't just haha they're evil, and instead they're a very complex ancestry who can be very different alignments, but just have very different morals to some of the other ancestries. And I thought it was done really well. And also the Aardwolf Gnoll, the really small one, very sweet, very sweet. There's also the Sweet Breath Gnoll, where you can get diplomacy things if people can smell your breath, which I believe is based on an old myth about hyenas leading you into a cave through the smell of their breaths, enchanting you. There's a lot here based on a lot of sort of hyena folklore from various parts of Africa, which is really cool, including the idea of their right side and left side being healing and poisonous, which is reflected on their feats as well, so that's very cool. The other one is the Gripply. I know some people were very fond of the Gripply. People seem to be very into frogs. They're very sweet, and they have some very cool feats. I really like one of their high level ones, Envenomed Edge, where they can consistently get off persistent poison damage with their weapons. They have quite a bit about poisons and toxins, which makes sense for a tree frog ancestry. And yeah, they don't stand out to me as much of the others, but I think fans of the little frog people will be happy. Then we get our 3 new ancestries. So my favourite of these 3 was the Shisk. I think the Shisk are absolutely cool. They are almost porcupine people who live underground and sustain themselves on very little, and so as such don't need very much and don't value material things very much. So instead what they value is secrets, and what they value is information. And so if you traded them a secret for like a very valuable gem, they will walk away laughing because they've won the trade in their mind, whereas you're like, oh brilliant, I just had to tell them something and got something very valuable. But to them that's just a trinket, and they're much more into the information. So I think again that's something that's makes for a very interesting society. And yeah, sometimes they can get a bit paranoid because they're big on collecting secrets and not so big on telling them away. They unsurprisingly are very good with intelligence and would make very good bards and wizards. Might be one to think about for the upcoming Magambu path. And they also get some really cool things with their spines, because they are like porcupines. They have these spines all over them. And so you can get it so that you can like break off your spines in people as a reaction, or shoot your spines at people and cause a lot of like bleeding and piercing damage. They can get some pretty nasty stuff with that, so that's very cool. So they're very built for sort of intelligence base, but they've got their own defenses built in. And talking about defenses, the next ancestry, the Gloma. So the Gloma are multiple-eyed, almost horse people who are absolutely terrified of anything with 2 eyes because they think their eyes are going to be stolen. They rely on scaring people in order to keep them away from themselves, which is why a lot of them worship Calicut. They basically will treat you as a polar bear, and they will try to make themselves look as big and as scary as possible so you won't attack them. The fact that you probably weren't going to attack them doesn't matter to them. They're pretty confident you were going to attack them. And so they're an absolutely terrified race of these massive, like, aberrational people, it's just absolutely hysterical. And it also makes sense why they're rather rare, because they don't like to be around other people, so not many people have seen them. So yeah, and they get some fantastic stuff where they can get like feats to help them like count things quickly with all their many eyes, and things to help them conquer their fear. They were very evocative ancestry, and yeah, again, I could really see how you could play one of these as a very frightened member of a party who's always on their toes. One ancestry that I can't see how I would play is the Konrasu. The Konrasu were probably the biggest disappointments for me in this book. I feel like I still know nothing about them. With these new ancestries, like with the orcs and the elves and the halflings, and the dwarves, you got multiple pages to talk about their culture and their society, and they got a lot more. So it's fair that the new ancestries won't be as developed as that. That makes sense. You only have a few paragraphs to get across what you mean. But with the other ancestries, I felt like they used those paragraphs effectively to get across, well, not everything about the society, enough for me to understand their core ideas and cultures and how to play them. The Konrasu opening paragraph, gives multiple conflicting ideas of how they came to be, and then says that no one knows, which I feel like is a waste of writing space and tells me nothing about them. And the rest doesn't give me much either. So I will say that Konrasu, while strong mechanically, they have some pretty nice healing abilities, are very weak lore-wise, and I think I'd struggle to have them at my table because I still don't know who they are. It's possible that will change in future, that we will get more on that Konrasu, but for now, they're probably the biggest disappointment for me. But the rest of the book is still fantastic, and after that we go into the regions. So we start off by going more into the general regions of the area before we go into the cities. And as soon as we get into the Bandu Hills, and I was immediately like, I can't remember where this is. I have no idea where the Bandu Hills were. And then look on the next page, and there's a little sidebar saying, where are we right now? And there's a description of where the Bandu Hills is in relation to everything else, which is exactly what I wanted, which was so helpful. Because at this point I only had the PDF, so I couldn't just flick back to the map. So just having this little sidebar was so helpful for me, because that was literally what I was getting confused about. Whoever made that decision to put that in there, thank you. That was so helpful. And this continues throughout these areas. There's some really cool areas here. I'm going to say my favourite, or mentioned it a little bit earlier, was the ruins of Ko. And this is where the Uemoto people live by. So the Ko was one of the cities that flew in the air, which used to be a part of the Shori Empire, and crashed in the barrier wall. And so now there's lots of strange old magical things there that nobody really understands, and a lot of people struggle to get to the ruins. But the Uemoto people know how to get there, and often are salvaged from the ruins. And talking about the new classes with the Trolley Summoner, I think an Uemoto Inventor could be a very interesting character, because I think there's so many like little things that they tinker with. I love the idea of an Uemoto Inventor possibly with a little mechanical falcon built out of scraps from Ko, because they are also big falconers and use them a lot in their scouting, and tend to raise them and then release them into the wild. And I loved the little sidebar on sustainable falconry as well. Falconers do such good work, and it was really nice to see that mentioned in the book as well. That was really sweet. So that was definitely my standout. But there's a lot of really cool stuff. There's a lot of some of the creatures that we get in like the Carver. Really odd but very cool. And yeah, there's a lot of good adventure hooks here as well. There's a lot of mysteries, a lot of strange people living out there, and strange things that, like gases that release from lakes. A lot of things to investigate for a party from near or far. And then we get into the cities. So I'm going to go over a little bit over some of them, but again, I want to start with my highlight, which was Usaro, very surprisingly. Usaro is somewhere I haven't bothered about before. It was very much, oh yeah, the evil demon monkey place, yeah. I'm much more generally interested in the sort of the thriving sort of cities. So Usaro was somewhere I wasn't expecting to like. But whoever did the write-up for Usaro did such a good job, I think, especially with the humans who live there and why they live there. And the idea that, like, people are like, well, like, the Matangi Orcs are offering you safety and somewhere to live, and they're like, but then I would be conceding my home to the demons. Like, I've lived here for generations. This is my house. They tried to take everything from us. This is the only thing I get to keep. And this is my last stand against them. And I really loved that. It really made me think, wow, okay, this has really added so much sort of power and life to these sort of humans in what is called the farm, to give you an idea of how their lives are. And sort of, it really, there's sort of that pride where people don't want to move even when they're somewhere is dangerous, and why should they? When this was their home, why should they be the ones to move? And that really moved me, and yeah, I really loved that. And the Asaro is also where we get the Shisenbei character, who is the evil wizard who pretends to be a powerful warrior. And yeah, I hope we see him in future. I found him very interesting. But I also do have to give a big shout out to Nantambu. I adore Nantambu. I adore the Megambia. I'm so excited for the upcoming path, and I loved like the study days they have, where they all go on study days, which is where they just go and get drunk with each other, all the students from the Megambia. And it's stuff like that, and with some of the other places, which make it feel so real. Like, one of the big things as well was in Kibwe. They have this whole thing where in their parliament, almost, their sort of political place, you're not supposed to wear shoes. So you all go in barefoot. But if somebody is like showing their distaste or something, they might lift up their shoe to indicate they're about to put it on to walk out, and this causes much uproar. And I just love that, because it's just such a silly political gesture that I can see happening. We have exactly the same kind of ridiculous like political gestures here, and I think in many countries. And it's just sort of the big things that people blow up, and like you just raise your shoe. And I love it because it just makes it feel so real. Like, that doesn't have to be relevant to an adventure. That might not ever come up in anyone's campaign, but reading that made Kibwe feel so much more alive to me, and made it feel like something like, yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that. And there's other little things as well, like there's in one of the taverns, there was somebody who, I believe in Sengor, where somebody brews potions that do 2 different effects. But sometimes they mess up, so they sell them on the cheap. And so these potions do one effect correctly, and the other one is random. And if you have ever run an RPG game, you know the party's going to buy one of them and see what it does. So absolutely love that as a little thing. That definitely is something that will crop up in campaigns. That both feels very sweet in the area, and is like, this is going to be absolutely hysterical, and having the GM decide what the other random effect is, and how that's going to happen when for the rest of the campaign your poor human is purple. So no, I love that a lot. I also, again, the art. I can't stop talking about the art in this. It's just so beautiful. I also think Senghor had an absolutely fantastic write-up. That was another one that I didn't care about as much, which I really love now. I really love there's a really interesting history there. And I really love, again, whoever wrote this chapter, how much they cared about how cities are designed based on what they deal with. How much of Senghor is built for flooding. Like, the environment of cities is so important, and like how they always keep their storehouses and anything stored very high. Decorations and buildings are always further up because they'll always just be washed away if they're lower down. How even the way the city is built is to encourage water to flow back into the river. Everything about the way the city was built considered its environment, and that was really impressive, and again made it feel much more realistic, and I loved that. And also the final one I want to mention, which was fantastic, was Vidrian. So Vidrian is sort of the only sort of major sort of nation similar to the Avastani ones, because it was colonized by Sheliaks. So unlike the other city-states, they cover lots of land. And Vidrian is basically a post-colonial nation that has only very recently thrown off the people who colonized it, and so it is very much a nation in flux, and I really like how that's portrayed. And one of the things I really like with the discussion of the fashion in Vidrian, and how some people incorporate chains into their clothes as to say that they can't control them anymore, while other Vidrians think that that's really crass. And I like that it's not treated that either side is wrong or right, but instead it's reflected how reactions in a post-colonial society, and reactions in any society, frankly, will be complex and different, and societies aren't a monolith, and there will be big divides in how to respond to big situations and how to respond to trauma and violence. And again, I thought that was handled surprisingly respectfully and really reflected a multi sort of cultural society, and a society that isn't a monolith, that have shared same experiences but don't take the same things from those experiences. And I really like that. And again, I think the way things in this book use cities and fashion and food to portray things, they don't just think about oh yeah, this is this culture, this is how they do war, this is how they do marriage. It's this is how they do food, this is how they do fashion, these are the certain things they wear, this is how they do tattoos. There's cultures in here are so in-depth, and that's something I really appreciate, because it's something we need more of, frankly. And talking about the food, I will say this is the closest we've got so far to a Pathfinder cookbook. In a couple of the sections here in the cities, we do get little sidebars of recipes for a particular hot chocolate, for instance. And I thought that was so nice. We were always arguing for a cookbook, and we finally got part of one. One thing I would have appreciated in this section is for the pronunciation guides to be consistent, because some of the cities, in fact I think 2 of them have pronunciation guides and the rest don't. One of them has a pronunciation guide on the side, and as a sidebar, the other one incorporates into the text, and the others don't have it at all. I think with that I can understand different authors wrote the different sections, so it's going to be different, but in the editing you kind of need to make it so that that's consistent across every section. Either have no pronunciation guides, all in sidebars, or all in the text, because that felt really jarring, having it sometimes there and sometimes not, and in different ways. So I'm not sure what happened there, but that was just a little off. And the only other thing I found very sort of strange in the book was there were a couple of lore inconsistencies, particularly in regards to the gods. So in the section on the regions, we have a part on the jungle, and we get into Olihimba, a green dragon who was previously mentioned in the Slithering adventure, and a dragon I took a very keen interest in, because despite being a green dragon, they were described as an orthodox follower of Pharasma. Pharasma, for any of those who you know, is a is a neutral god who allows neutral, lawful neutral, and neutral good alignments. She does not allow neutral evil. But this dragon is described as evil. In this book, it's kind of given an alignment where it wasn't before. It cannot be an orthodox Pharasmin and be evil. That doesn't make sense to me, and it feels like they stick more to the idea of, oh, this is green dragon, so must be evil, which I don't like, rather than thinking this particular green dragon is actually neutral, and because it's a Pharasmin. And again, there is later on an Abadar cleric who is described as neutral good. Abadar explicitly does not give powers to neutral good people. You cannot be a neutral good cleric of Abadar. He is not a good guy. He is lawful neutral. He will allow lawful good, but he does not grant powers to neutral good. So that was odd for me. I feel like maybe, I don't know if that, was an editing thing, or if some people weren't as familiar with the law. I'm not sure what's happened there, but that was very strange to me. But those were just a couple of very minor things. There were... most of it made sense, and one thing I did really like was the Serenite priest in Vidrian, and how, again, there's conflict about the different religions there, how obviously worship of Asmodeus has been banned for Sheliax, but that, again, their reaction to other imported deities there, and sort of discussing whether to ban them, and the sort of reaction back again about, well, some of us now worship these, so if you're cracking down on that, then we're getting back to a tyranny. So again, there's a lot of conflict there. Vidrian was fantastic, and also the art of them pulling down the statue, having a like triumphant, beautiful piece of people pulling down a statue. I appreciated a lot. That was really good. We end the book with a bestiary. It was just a small one, but adds some very cool new creatures into the world. Including, I really like the Zimba snake, the one that can hurt or heal you, and there's mentions that earlier how it's hunted down, and certain herpetologists might not like that you're doing that. And also there's a unique creature in here who's very interesting, who's sort of a protector of the Mwangi people. And I really liked him. I think this might have been Michelle Jones' work, but I could be wrong. But I think he was definitely my favourite. I do like a unique creature, and I like having one that's not like an evil one, who's very much just a protector who in your time of greatest need comes. It feels very sort of mythological, and he was very cool, so I liked him a lot. But that's the general overview of the whole book, and having said all that, I have to say, if you like Pathfinder 2e, you should get this book. If you don't play Pathfinder 2e, but you play other RPGs and would quite like a new setting, you should get this book. If you haven't played any RPGs, you're considering getting in, you should get this book. You should just get this book. It is probably my favourite book so far. I think the Lost Omen setting has absolutely been smashing it out of the water, and this is an absolutely wonderful and gorgeous edition. And I cannot recommend it enough. Buy 3, like, if you can, give one to your mum. I don't mind. It's just, I cannot recommend this book enough, and I'm probably going to be talking about it for quite a long time. So yes, and hopefully it will be very useful in the upcoming Strength of Thousands path, which I'm also very excited to have a look at. But until next time, I'll see you all. Oh, one more thing that I completely forgot. Still no penguins.